including women in various kinds of relationship of yearning or success or failure or wealth or run out resources, various kinds of machines and body parts, the moving of body parts from room to room and their ontological transformation in the movement, the way the translations of parts and their reintroduction transform senses of self. As an ethnographer, Karis has a wonderful ear for hearing the way people narrate their own relationship to variously distributed parts that are and are not parts of themselves in these narrations. She then she talks about ontological choreography, the kind of dance of being as a verb, and a verb that is irreducibly historically specific, irreducibly semiotically material. It is not all the time everywhere. It is about these relationalities as they constitute the actors in their very action. Right? So that the actors are the product of the relationality and don't in some kind of preset way simply enter into relationships with boundaries more or less intact at the end of the day. Okay? That's the kind of imagination Karis is trying to develop as an ethnographer of technoscience, and I'm plagiarizing from her ruthlessly in thinking about companion species. That informs my way of thinking about the cross-species relationship, which is also mediated by our entire cultural apparatus, most certainly including these various kinds of enterprised up relationships to biomedicine and veterinary practice, to reproductive and other technologies, to pedagogical doctrines. If you're not clicker training your dog, you're an ethical reprobate. I learned that my godson in Montessori school was being subjected to the very same pedagogical doctrines that I was learning in obedience training with our dogs. And then I learned that the history of pedagogical doctrines runs parallel with animals and children for a long time, that this was not news. It's one of those discoveries. You think you've discovered something, and then you check around a little bit because you have a few more or less retarded scholarly skills, and you find out that this is very old news indeed. And how could you have not known? That the training of dolphins for sea life and for the Navy had a whole lot to do with the way your godson was being taught to integrate his body and sensory motor systems in achieving certain kinds of self-control of his temper. How could I have not known that he was being trained up as a perfectly good dolphin for SeaWorld? And that my dog, too, would someday be worthy of Montessori school. And that she was properly enterprised up and a perfectly good feminist yuppie dog and an alpha bitch worthy of her species. And that all of this is, of course, funny. I mean, I find research funny most of the time. It's a kind of that serious joking relationship anyone with a sacramental consciousness has to reality. This can't possibly be what they mean, and yet it appears to be. That sort of outrageous scandal of what is. That's at the heart of critical theory, I think. The fundamental impulse of critical theory is the outrageous but nonetheless true scandal of what is. Well, that's my relationship to this stuff. But it's also maybe a gentler relationship with that. It's also finding the creativities, the interesting crosstalk, these sorts of ontological choreographies that are making lives worth living, that are producing a going on together that is less committed to to kind of death-defying heroics, more committed to mundane dailiness, more about the ordinary ethical accountabilities of life in these worlds, which aren't all the time everywhere. That out of these worlds, I'm finding absolutely wonderful practices of mundane dailiness, the inquiry into the kind of ethical and epistemological worlds which we are coming into and bringing about. So I'm not finding a scolding consciousness as a particularly useful guide into these, in my particular case, dog cultures, which is where I've been spending all of my time the last couple of years. So I use the term companion species neither to scold nor edify, but as a kind of interrogative term about this sort of historical emergent with other animals who are not meat animals, are not lab animals, are not wilderness animals, are not war dogs, are not vermin, are not pariah dogs, but very particular historical relationships here. So this is not dog and man. Okay. So with that in mind, let me tell you something about dog genome projects that are going on, of which there are at least 3 large international projects. And for this, I do need the next slide. Okay. This is a late 20th century or early 21st century Gregor Mendel. You can see the monk, who is not with his pea plants, but with the double helix. Another object you can't go through daily life without tripping over. I think the fetus, and Michelangelo's creation touch are inescapable daily imagery in technoscience. Now, dog genome projects, as I said, exist in 3 large international projects, one in France, in Rennes, the Canine Radiation Hybrid Mapping Project, which involves a multinational collaboration to produce a dog genetic map using a certain set of technologies not being used by the other projects. A collaboration involving the second project involves a collaboration among the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center and the National Cancer Institutes, University of California, Berkeley, Cornell, and Ralston Purina Dog Food, a very important mover and shaker. Because for one thing, they want niche diets. They want to be able to market metabolically favorable foods for niche marketing for dogs who can afford that kind of nutrition. Anyway, there's more to it than that, but Ralston Purina is one of the great modernizers of the human-dog pet relationship. Rin Tin Tin, Lassie, and Ralston Purina and Gaines will get you a long way in this story. That's one of the very interesting dog genome projects is run out of that collaboration. And still another is being run out of a multinational collaboration of over 21 countries, European, North American, and Asian. Not any Latin American countries that I've seen, but I may be out of date. It's the International Society of Animal Genetics, working on a project called DogMap. All of these are somewhat competing projects, and part of what's at stake is whether, as it is at stake in the human genome, whether the genetic markers and genes mapped and identified will be in the public domain or will be will be owned as property, will have proprietary rights attached to them. So that the International Society of Animal Genetics is the only one of these 3 projects committed to putting all of its data in the public domain and attempting to resist the rather complete market logic of the enclosure of the commons of the genome, which is by and large the rule in the genome enterprised up. That's not news to anybody. There's a range of companies that I just want to name in contemporary companion animal species culture. All of them have the spliced names that we've gotten used to in biotechnology in general. For example, there's VetGen, which is a startup company bringing together geneticists from the University of Michigan, Michigan State University, and some others, putting out several hundred markers, all trademarked and under proprietary protection. There's PE Zogen, which is a spin-off of Perkins-Elmer, a very big transnational mover and shaker. The same company that spun off Celera Genomics that has published the human genome in collaboration with the National Institutes of Health, but pushed the speed of the Human Genome Project a lot. There's a dog version. ImGen, an immunological biogenetics corporation. Optogen for eye diseases. Dogs turn out to be models for eye diseases of interesting kinds. Also, the dog breed culture has considerable interest in these specific diseases. And then the various cryopreservation banks that I named earlier. Now, in that context, that kind of ecology of the dog genome, I want to move my talk along by referring to dog internet culture around the questions of, around the interactions between dog breeders and scientists, between different communities of expertise. The languages of expertise of the breeders and the languages and practices of expertise of the geneticists as they come together in 3 internet-mediated social material sites these days. One of them is the Canine Diversity Project website, which is a kind of pedagogical effort put together by a geneticist at the University of Ottawa, John Armstrong, that sets up a whole range of linkage sites for following through dog genetic health issues,